It's only 8:03, so it's not all that bad. Om Mami. Om Mami. Om Mami. May the divine presence be with us. So, a burble. The world is full of burbles. If I'm not mistaken, we're at the poem All Things Desire. Is that correct? Does anybody have their book marked?
That is correct, yes.
That is correct. Oh, wonderful. Heidi, do you feel like reading that incredible poem?
Sure. All things desired. All things desire to be like God. And infinite space is a mirror that tries to reflect his body, but it can't. All that infinite existence can show us of him is only an atom of God's being. God stood behind himself one night and cast a brilliant shadow from which creation came. Even this shadow is such a flame that moths consume themselves in it every second, with their sacred passion to possess beautiful forms. Existence mirrors God the best it can, though how arrogant for any image in that mirror, for any human being to think they know his will. Continued, okay, next page. For his will has never been spoken. His voice would ignite the earth's wings and all upon it. We invent truths about God to protect ourselves from the wolf's cries we hear and make. All things desire to be like God. All things desire to love.
Okay, again, please.
All things desire. All things desire to be like God. And infinite space is a mirror that tries to reflect his body, but it can't. All that infinite existence can show us of him is only an atom of God's being. God stood behind himself one night and cast a brilliant shadow from which creation came. Even this shadow is such a flame that moths consume themselves in it every second, with their sacred passion to possess beautiful forms. Existence mirrors God the best it can, though how arrogant for any image in that mirror, for any human being to think they know his will. For his will has never been spoken. His voice would ignite the earth's wings and all upon it. We invent truths about God to protect ourselves from the wolves' cries we hear and make. All things desire to be like God. All things desire to love.
Well, this is like a sermon, isn't it? Has anyone got anything they'd like to say about this amazing poem?
Shankar,
Yes, dear.
uh, when I was 15 years old, I was in a tragic motor car accident, and I lost my best friend and her brother.
Hmm.
And this changed my life because what I was doing and what I've been doing is looking and hoping to sense God's will for me in my life. So when we talk about looking for God's will, to me, it covers a very broad spectrum.
Yes. Saint Teresa of Avila was asked about God's will by one of her superiors. And she said, that no one has to tell a bird's wing what to do. It knows. And this poem ends so strongly. First, it says, we invent truths about God to protect ourselves from the wolf's cries we hear and make. Hmm? Then it says, all things desire to be like God. All things desire to love. And notice he doesn't say just all human beings. He says all things. So this accident you had at age 15 that redirected your life, and you were seeking to find God's will for you.
Yes,
Well, that seems from here, June, that seeking was itself the expression, like the bird's wing. A bird's wing knows what to do. So you have been seeking, and what did you say the last time you were with us? Your life has become a prayer to God.
Right.
And I think Aquinas would just simply bow down to you for the truth of that, June. So all things desire to be like God. All things desire to love. And, there's a very poignant image earlier in the poem. Even this shadow is such a flame that moths consume their lives in it, their selves in it. Moths consume their selves in it every second with their sacred passion to possess beautiful form.
No.
Yes, we do that. And that sacred passion is to love. We may, as he said, we invent truths because we hear the wolf's cry.
Mhm.
But eventually we're all just being like God. In another poem, Aquinas says that God told him, "You cannot be what I am not. You cannot be what I am not." So this is one of the glories of these mystics, is that they know no limits to God. As it's said, as he says, and so many of these say this in one way or another. It's trying, infinite space is a mirror that tries to reflect its body, but it can't. All that infinite existence can show us of him is only an atom of God's existence. So we do our best to understand the illimitable, but the mind can't hold it. We can only
Right.
be it. Did you just say right, June? Is that what you said? Right?
Yes.
Yes.
God is so big that, and we often want to contain him, but we can't.
Yeah, that's what he means by we invent these truths about God, to
Right.
protect ourselves. Because God is a wolf's cry as well as a saint's soothing voice. This is what it's so hard for us to hold, those two thoughts simultaneously. God is not this or that. God is this and that. Anyone else have anything to say about this sermon of a poem?
I do.
Yes, please.
The section that really has got I'm stuck on is not stuck, but just is the one, even this shadow is such a flame that moths consume their cells in it every second with their sacred passion to possess beautiful forms. It's like, of course, we are the moths drawn to the flame, which is this brilliant shadow. And it's kind of like talking about our need for form. And that the more this beautiful form, you know, there are all kinds of levels of being attracted to beautiful forms or wanting to possess them. You know, that can be a negative thing or it can be a higher thing. Well, let's say a lower thing and a higher thing. And when we get that close to this actual flame, the brilliant flame, we consume ourselves in it.
Yes, another great poet and mystic and philosopher, Adi Shankaracharya, said, "My mind fell like a hailstone into the ocean of consciousness and therein dissolved, was consumed." My mind fell like a hailstone into the ocean of consciousness and therein dissolved. Same message, different messenger. Well, June, I think I speak for all of us when I think I speak for all of us when I say that we're very glad you survived that accident. And
That
please go ahead.
that's really what I think really put me on the right track.
Yes. We always question when we survive, when others we love die.
Right.
Situation.
Right.
And we do not, we question. Another way to look at it is they got an early ticket out. They didn't have to live till they were in their 90s. Heidi, you said something, but we couldn't hear it.
Well, I was muted. That wasn't me, actually.
Oh, okay.
I just laughed and clapped my hands when you said that.
Right.
Maybe you intuitively heard me. Or it could be June's, maybe from answering machine. I don't know, June. She's getting a call, I think.
I see. That's it. Okay.
And can't mute it, so.
Well, anyone else have anything to say before we move on to the next poem?
Yes, Brother Shankara.
Yes, please, dear.
I was going to say that sometimes when I feel overwhelmed with all these questions that my mind is trying to kind of grasp for answers, I withdraw into that teaching of, I guess, Sri Ramakrishna, one amongst many, that come into the neighborhood of God. Only then you will get the answer. So then I try to divert my energy into finding out how to love God more, or increase my faith and devotion, and put efforts into that, and put the questions aside for some time at least.
Yes, perfect. Because it is the nature of our mind, we're speaking of our left mind, of course. It is the nature of the left mind to question, to doubt, to be afraid, all those things. And so, yes, you're right. We need to take refuge in the teachings of the great masters, the great spiritual masters, and say, when Christ said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all else shall be added unto you," really not a whole lot more needs to be said, except his other saying, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." So to seek the kingdom of God, we purify our hearts, which is a long and joyous process. All things desire to love. And the more we grasp that, the more free we are to do it. And the more we can set aside the doubts and fears and questions. Thank you for that, Swayam. That was just right. Anyone else before we go on?
Brother Shankara, this is Haima.
Yes, Haima, I know it is.
Every stanza has so much meaning in this poem.
Oh, yes.
Very strong meaning. And when he said all things, I took it as all of us. All of us, right? Isn't that true? All of us.
Well, he means every object in universe.
Every object, everything. Right?
All things.
That's what I took it as. All of us desire to be like God. Forgiveness, kindness, compassion, all these qualities of God. And also this one touched me. We invent truths about God to protect ourselves. And that's what we've been doing through Vedanta, all these teachings of sages, Buddha, Jesus Christ, Krishna. We have been trying to get the truths out of all the gods to protect ourselves, to refuge ourselves. That's what I was thinking.
Yes.
We've been doing every day, every week. From the wolf's cries we hear and make. Exactly. It's very touching. We invent.
It is very touching.
Mm-hmm. And existence mirrors God the best it can, because we see God in everything, right? So I guess.
Well, if we have learned to open our eyes in that way, yes, we do.
Exactly.
Most people are like moths to the flame
Mm-hmm.
of desire, and for that matter, most things.
Yes. That sacred passion to possess beautiful forms. I think those are all sensual pleasures. Do you think he's talking about?
No.
No.
Well, that too, I suppose.
I mean, I'm thinking maybe.
No, I'm thinking that it means.
I wasn't sure exactly. I was thinking.
Yes, it could be read that way, Haima.
Yeah, to possess beautiful forms, different forms, have this, have that, and things like those. That
I think it has a higher meaning as well.
Okay.
That we move on an ascending scale, it seems.
Yes.
But we consume ourselves in that quest, and Then if the stories about reincarnation are true, we take new bodies and move on.
Yes, truly.
Thank you, Haima.
Yes, thank you, Brother Shankar.
Oh, this is the poem that I mentioned earlier. This next one. You cannot be what God is not. All are having a relationship with God. A pear taken from a limb and set in a bowl. Surely it is talking to its Lord and happy that it is being honored for its life, and somehow knowing that soon it will be returning to Him. We use words like returning. Think about that. Inherent in that word is separation, and separation from God is never really possible. What can you be that He is not? You cannot be what I am not, my Lord once said to me. You cannot be what God is not. All are having a relationship with God. A pear taken from a limb and set in a bowl. Surely it is talking to its Lord and happy that it is being honored for its life, and somehow knowing that soon it will be returning to Him. We use words like returning. Think about that. Inherent in that word is separation, and separation from God is never really possible. What can you be that He is not? You cannot be what I am not, my Lord once said to me. What do you hear? What do you hear when you hear this poem?
Brother Shankara, I hear that it implies that God is in all of us. Peace of God is in all of us. That's what I resonate with when he said, you cannot be what I am not, because that's what we do the meditation for, to self-realization and finding God within ourselves, right?
Yes.
And that's exactly what can you be that he is not. You cannot be what I am not. That's very, very true. I strongly believe in this. Thank you so much. I'll give others a chance to evaluate this.
Thank you, Haima.
Well, I think it's, how we often talk about one poem following another.
Yes.
This last poem, all things desire to love, to be like God. So what I hear in this one, of course, is all are having a relationship with God. So I think, first of all, no coincidence that Ladinsky put this poem after that one.
Oh, you're absolutely right, in my opinion, dear. You're absolutely right.
You guys have taught me well to observe all this. And then, you think of, well, of course, all things, but we talk about animals and even a pear, a piece of fruit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Including all things, okay? Which I like how he says, a pear taken from a limb and set in a bowl. I mean, that is a relationship with God, okay? And then it's happy to be honored, having its life honored by being chosen, picked, and then eaten, I guess. And then they talk about returning to God. So like the pear dies, perhaps like our soul dies, or we leave our body and we return, our soul, returns. But then he talks about, we use words like returning. Think about that. It implies you're separating in order to return. So I'm spinning the wheels and going, okay, so even though you do go back from where you came from, there really is no separation. Did I get that? Is that?
That certainly seems how it is from here.
Okay.
He
All right.
starts this poem by saying, all are having a relationship with God, whether we know it or not, whether we keep that in our awareness. And then he talks about a pair, and what a simple metaphor. A pear taken from the limb and set in a bowl. And then he talks about our thoughts about such a thing. Oh, it's happy to be honored for its life. It's glad to be returning to God. And then he says, wait a minute. There's no such thing as separation. And then this absolutely exquisite line. What can you be that God is not? What can you be that he is not? You cannot be what I am not, my Lord once said. In other words, we can only be what he is. Therefore, that's who we are. That's how I heard this poem. You know, Aquinas is very clever with language. You cannot be what I am not. That means you can only be what I am.
But he gives an honor, place, and purpose to each thing and each person.
Yes, June.
If we discover it, that's the challenge, I think.
Yes, as you have discovered. So this relationship that we have increases and increases and increases until we can acknowledge, as the saint has here acknowledged, that we are that. We are the divine. We are having a relationship with ourselves, with ourself. So this is
It also suggests to me, like the profound mystery that we all have within us, because God is everything. To be God, I think Swamiji said this. He's to be supreme. It can't. The finite cannot be. The infinite cannot be fathomed in finite terms.
mm-hmm.
And I was reminded of what Sri Ramakrishna, the story of the salt doll.
Mm-hmm.
Once a salt doll went to the ocean and it never came back.
Yes, the words Sri Ramakrishna says a salt doll goes to the ocean to measure its depth. And of course, once it enters the ocean, it dissolves and never comes back. Well, that's precisely the same message that Saint Shankaracharya was giving. But this poem is really, if we let ourselves rest in the arms of this poem, what can you be? What can you be that he is not? What can you be that he is not? You cannot be what I am not, my Lord once said to me. And of course, the premise from here, at least, is always that we take these saints literally. This is not some rhetorical turn of phrase. So we cannot be what God is not. We can only be what God is. And again, this is holding those two thoughts at once. That God is not this or that. God is this and that. And some of it is not pretty. Yes, June.
What a gift.
Yes. For those of you who didn't hear what June said, I understood her to say, what a gift.
That's right.
And for those of you who did, Divya spoke, and she mentioned a couple of names. She mentioned Swamiji. Swamiji is the affectionate name we have for the saint who brought the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna and the whole lineage that Sri Ramakrishna represented to the United States. And Sri Ramakrishna was a Bengali saint, in the opinion of many, an incarnation of God, who lived in West Bengal and then Calcutta from 1836 to 1886. We just celebrated his birthday yesterday. So anything else from anyone about this poem?
Brother Shankara?
Yes, dear.
So the last couple of paragraphs, so starting from separation from God is never really possible to, what can you be that he is not, you cannot be what I'm not, my Lord once said to me. Those speak to me or bring to my mind the Advaitic concept that, I mean, we are divine. And from going back to the other poem that God created a brilliant shadow from which the creation came, and that the flame of the shadow is what moths fly into and consume themselves. So that to me is sort of Maya. So we are in that being consumed because of that Maya, but we are really, there's no separation if we realize that we are always outside of that.
Yes, the Advaita, which means non-dual or non-duality. There is only oneness. And there is among the so-called great sayings of that philosophy, one that says, Tat Tvamasi. It's Sanskrit, it means that thou art. And it's pointing to exactly what Aquinas is pointing to here. You cannot be what God is not. Thou art that thou art. So that's how Swayam was adding that up. And it was from here anyway, well added up. And June chimed in with an affirmation as well. And now we have, as Heidi says, there's absolute intentionality in the arrangement of these poems. Cindy, are you still there? Would you like to read God's Nature?
Sure. God's nature. Sometimes we think what we are saying about God is true, when in fact it is not. It would seem of value to differentiate between what is God's nature and what is false about love. I have come to learn that the truth never harms or frightens. I have come to learn that God's compassion and light can never be limited. Thus, any God who could condemn is not a God at all, but some disturbing image in the mind of a child we best ignore until we can until we can cure the dark. I'll read it again. God's nature. Sometimes we think what we are saying about God is true, when in fact it is not. It would seem of value to differentiate between what is God's nature and what is false about love. I have come to learn that the truth never harms or frightens. I have come to learn that God's compassion and light can never be limited. Thus, any God who could condemn is not a God at all, but some disturbing image in the mind of a child we best ignore until we can cure the dark.
Anyone? Anything about this poem?
I'll just say real quick, I've always loved the line in this particular poem, I have come to learn that the truth never harms or frightens.
Mm-hmm. And that's echoed again and again in various ways, in various rhetorical forms, poetic forms, by the saints throughout the book.
Kind of turns God-fearing on its ear.
Yeah.
Which a lot of these saints do.
Mm-hmm.
Thank God.
Yes. Well, that's why they're called love poems from God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They come through these people. It's not love poems about God, not love poems to God, love poems from God. Thank you, Cindy.
Brother
Anybody
Chakra,
else?
this is Katrina. I have a question about that because that portion stood out to me too, in terms of truth never frightens. Can you hear me?
Yes, oh yeah.
Okay. And so how do you determine whether, if you're frightened, if it's a non-truth or it's just something about your character that's frightening you?
Well, since you asked the question, two thoughts. First, the wolf's cries that are mentioned in the previous poem, a previous poem. We hear them from others and we make them ourselves. Fear is one of the ways that we have of distracting ourselves from the truth of our being, the truth of being itself. Now, there are times when it is good to be afraid because there is a real threat or real danger. And so we can look to the previous poem and say, well, that cannot be anything but God because there is nothing but God. There's nothing that we can be or hear or see that God is not. And yet, ultimately, we must, as he says, we must, if we wish to progress along the path that June was talking about earlier, of greater and greater realization of the truth of God's being. We have to cure that darkness. And so we move aside from something that will harm us. But we don't confuse that with a personal threat, which is what we do when we become afraid. We correctly identify it and react appropriately. Jill Bolte Taylor, in her book, My Stroke of Insight, notes the fact, now she's a neuroanatomist, so she really knows what she's talking about. She said that fear and anger are both chemically triggered in us. They're secretions from what she refers to as the reptilian brain. And they last, and this is astounding, those secretions degrade and are no longer effective in creating their effect in 90 seconds. 90 seconds. She said, if we are afraid after that, or if we are angry after that, it is a choice. It is a neural loop. It is a neurological phenomenon that we are engaging ourselves in. So it's for us, as I hear this poem, for us to cure the dark is to be able to, as my father's father used to say, when you get angry, count to 100 and then see if there's anything to be angry about. So most of what we are doing when we're being fearful or angry is habitual. Does that get it, Katrina?
Yes. It's more habitual than it is.
It can even be indulgent. It can be something we're indulging in. There's a great exposition of this in the book Journey to Ixtlan by Carlos Castaneda. He himself, Castaneda, indulged in fear as a way to motivate himself and as a way to understand the world. And his teacher, Don Juan Matus, pointed out to him the uselessness of indulging in fear.
Thank you.
Thank you, dear. Thank you for asking a very, very pregnant question.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
does Jill Bolte Taylor in her book offer suggestions on how to break that loop?
Oh, yes, she does. Oh, does she ever? And what it is this. It's exactly what prayer, contemplation, concentration, and meditation lead us to, and that is the away from the dominance of the left mind's chatter consciousness into the right mind or heart consciousness. She said we have two personalities. We have this left mind personality that in this culture, in this time, in this society has become so dominant. And she said we have a heart-centered, it's reflected in these poems that we're reading, this heart-centered consciousness, this heart-centered personality. And so she says, yes, that we can begin just, and this is why I was so excited when I first read her book. I said, this woman doesn't know anything about Patanjali, and yet she's saying the same things that Patanjali did. Patanjali is a great yoga philosopher and psychologist from the Eastern tradition. He also wrote a book called Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Yoga means union with the divine presence. And she discovered, and what she, in Sanskrit we have these words samskaras and vasanas and so on. She was a neuroanatomist. She called them neural loops. Neural loops. I cannot recommend that book highly enough. First of all, it's just a joy to read about the triumph of the spirit of this woman who had a massive left brain hemorrhage that took her left brain completely offline. She did not know who or what she was. She did not know, she became, in a word, infantile, and she didn't even know her own mother or what a mother was. The name of the book is My Stroke of Insight.
Mm-hmm.
And I cannot recommend it highly enough. It is just a treasure
It truly is.
of spiritual awakening. And now she's still working, Jill Bolte Taylor. And you can find her online. Find her on YouTube and elsewhere. And when she's asked, who is she? She says, I am a being as big as the universe. And just like these mystics, these saints, I believe she means it with every fiber of her being. Because she knows it from her experience.
Thank you, Brother Shankara.
Anybody else have anything to say about this amazing poem, God's Nature?
Just one thought about Jill Bolte Taylor, Brother Shankara.
Yes.
She continuously analyzed every little bit of information or acquaintance with the staff, and then she self-taught herself to overcome that.
Yes.
Continuously self-taught. That was the very inspiring woman, very exceptionally inspiring lady.
Yes.
How she survived such a huge stroke and came out shining like a star. And now she's giving seminars and talks all over the country. It's so amazing. I was very inspired by that, by her demeanor, everything.
Yeah.
Thank you for the PDF. I really appreciated that. Thank you so much.
And she says we can choose
Yes,
which neural loops to cooperate with.
it's always a choice. We have the choice to choose who we want to be. That's what she chose, the right one instead of the left one.
Mhm.
She used that right brain instead of left brain, and whatever is functional at that time, only right was functional for her. She could continue. I don't know how she did it. It still shocks me and stuns me every time I think about her. How did she do that after a humongous shock, stroke? A lot of stroke patients don't have that. Very rarely you see this.
Well,
She's one of a rare.
she was already an extraordinary human being. I
Yes.
mean, there are not very many,
Many.
there are not very many neuroanatomists doing research and teaching at Harvard.
Yes, very, very clever.
She was already an exceptional
Thank you.
human being in so many ways. But as she said, there was a lot about her, and she just says it straight out in the book, there was a lot about her that was really unpleasant. And as she rediscovered it,
That's right. That's right.
she said, these are now choices for me.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Brother.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was the final line of the poem where about fear, and God is not someone to be feared, but the prayer, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, God is someone you call on when you fear. The fear is you creating the separation, right? And
That's how it seems from here, yes.
and so
But how does this poem start? It talks about relationship. And how does that psalm start? Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me.
thou art with me.
Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thy power, in other words, thy power. Liam, I just happened to notice this is a great picture of you.
Thank you, Brother Shankara. Appreciate it.
Who is that movie star?
Nice, June, nice. Very sweet.
Thank you, June.
Well, it's after 9. I think we've said, oh my God, yes. This next poem that we'll start with next week, The Christ Said. Oh, it is so deeply sweet. So anything else from anyone? All right, dears. Because it's so needful, join me in your thoughts, if you will, and this ancient prayer for peace, if you will. Let there be peace in outer space. Let there be peace in the sky, on the earth, and in the waters. Let there be peace in the herbs, the plants, and the trees. May the gods be peaceful. May the whole universe be pervaded by peace. Let this infinite, universal peace prevail throughout my being. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace. Peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. That translation, which is a very fresh one, very, very available to us in modern English, is by Swami Yogeshananda, the man who founded this Vedanta center and whose memorial service we held on Saturday, this past Saturday. He was a remarkable human being, a remarkable face of the divine. And he left the body on February 13th, so we know that he is speeding on to something yet more remarkable. Any final thoughts from anyone? All right, dears. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be cheerful. May you have peace of mind. And may you go forward in the Lord's loving and protective embrace. Good night.
Thank you, Brother Shankara and everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
Emma.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
June, so nice hearing from you tonight. We always love it when you speak up. Whoa, and those aren't just words, dear. Those really, we love to hear from you.
Well, missing class is a minus for me. And one night it was unavoidable, but the other night I simply forgot.
Well, it happens.
I'm showing my age.
Ah, me too, dear. Me too.
You're a youngster.
I am yes, we can never compare people, but yes, I'm a youngster. And, plugging along reasonably well considering. But I'm just about to finish my 79th revolution around the old sun.
Okay.
That's and we'll see what happens next.
Yes.
That's always what's a joy.
Each day is a gift.
Yes, indeed. Some days it comes with a spanking, but it's still a gift.
It's still a gift.
Yes. All right, dears.
Good night.
It's so good to see each one of you. And when each one of you contributes, when you share, it means so much. So until next week, Jai Ma, Jai, Jai, Jai. Hallelujah to you all.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night, everybody.
Good
Bye.
night.
Good night,
Good
everyone.
night.
Thank you.